Hello and welcome to this video regarding the Teyes CC3 360 for the Opel or Vauxhall Astra H. This video is intended to give as much information as possible to anybody interested in purchasing this device. It will be covering some of its features and some of its biggest issues. Hopefully this will help you make a more informed purchasing decision. Now, just to be clear, I'm not an expert. I haven't used any other Android-based systems, so I'm unable to give you a comparison between this and other devices. I'm just somebody who purchased and used this device in their car for the past few months and would love just to help you avoid a lot of the issues and frustrations that I experienced in my time owning it. I would also like to apologize in advance for making any mistakes in the video. If you have any questions about things that I did not cover, please feel free to comment below. I'll do my best to answer your questions, and if needed, I'll make additional videos. Without that mentioned, I would like to proceed with the video. So a few months ago, I started looking into purchasing a multimedia for my car. I was interested in getting something that would fit nicely in the dash and wouldn't just look or feel like another cheap Android tablet. And after quite a lot of searching, I stumbled upon the brand of Teyes and their CC3 head unit. Going through the product page and marketing material, there were quite a lot of good looking features, in addition of having a nice looking interface. One of the advertised features was specifically for the Astra's steering wheel buttons. It claimed that unlike other Android-based devices, they supported long and short press functionality. This function is also shown in a video on their YouTube channel, but more on that later in the video. This led me to believe that the device was tested in the car and there shouldn't be any major issues, but unfortunately that was quite wrong. The unit was offered in two different mounting configurations. The first, which I went with, was the top mounted option, and that would be taking the place of the factory screen. The second would be taking the place of the original radio. I didn't like the second option because it made the device sit at a lower height and made it feel less comfortable to interact with while driving. Now, both options come with specific warnings. First, for the top mounted one, is that we would be losing climate control information, because that is only handled by the factory screen and the CC3 isn't able to reproduce that functionality. This means that you would be losing the ability to know at what temperature you had your AC set to. The second option mentions that the Teyes mounting frame would be overlapping a bit with the AC control buttons. After choosing which variant I wanted, I went through their website to look at some of the accessories they were offering. One of them was a 360 camera system that was compatible with the CC3. The system looked quite nice and was the first time I ever saw such an accessory being offered to an aftermarket head unit. The only catch: to purchase the 360 camera system, I would need to upgrade my purchase to the top spec CC3, so that I would be upgraded to the CC3 360 variant, which coincidentally was the most expensive one they offered, and I would need to purchase both the cameras and the CC3 at once. Purchasing the devices separately was not allowed. Teyes claims that this is due to differences in the motherboards used in the two different devices, making them effectively two different products, which is a bit confusing. If the CC3 360 is considered a separate device, why doesn't Teyes offer it as a separate purchase? So as instructed, I placed an order. Now, I want to be completely honest regarding my purchase and everything regarding the device. I originally intended to purchase this device via the Australia website, but at the time I was told that they didn't have the device that I wanted in stock. So after some additional searching, I found a link to an Alibaba seller. On the screen is the amount that I paid for the device, including shipping, import taxes, and in addition, you can see at the top I was issued a partial refund. The refund was requested by me after trying to resolve the issues with the head unit while receiving poor quality support from the seller and manufacturer. Now, with the order placed, the only thing left was for me to wait. The order was made at the start of November and it arrived a week or two before Christmas. As soon as it arrived, I started installing the device in the car, and right from the start I was starting to experience some of the biggest issues with the device. The major one being that there was no power going to the AC unit, which wasn't very nice as it was the middle of December and the weather was quite cold. I almost immediately contacted the seller seller for support, but as previously mentioned, the support I got was quite poor. Instead of getting adequate advice for troubleshooting, I was only getting the same thing. Have you plugged in the cables correctly? And why don't you go to an auto shop for them to install the device in your car? Now, I wouldn't consider myself to be an electrical engineer, but I was very sure that I could follow simple instructions on how this needed to be connected, which I did. The connectors are different sizes, so it would be very hard even for a newbie to mess them up. The second major issue with the device was that I wasn't getting any steering wheel controls to work, which I also mentioned to the seller and support, which also resulted in them constantly mentioning the same thing. Did you use the correct canvas setting? After a while of communication with them, I just decided to go looking across the internet for people who had purchased this device and installed it in the same car, and hopefully this might help me resolve the issues I was facing. And that's what actually ended up happening. With that, I would like to take a moment and show on screen some of the people in groups that helped me fix my issues. Links will be in the description. Now that we have gone through the different issues regarding compatibility of the device with the car, let's just go over how the device is being software supported by the manufacturer. To get information about that, there are two websites that we can visit. One is based in Australia, the second one in Russia. Let's first check the Australia side. There we can see that there are separate updates for the two devices, one for the CC3 and the other for the 360. And here is where we see another big issue. Despite the CC3 360 being TI's latest and most expensive product they offer, it's getting far less updates compared to their older CC3 device. The only available firmware for the 360 is the one that the device was shipped with, meaning for the past 9 months this device did not get a single firmware update, while the regular CC3 has had 4 since June of last year. So in short, you're paying more for a device with worse software support and user experience. Moving on, the annoying thing about the Australia site is that we don't get any information regarding the updates themselves. We are only given a link to a Google Drive containing a RAR file. If we want to see more information about the actual updates themselves, we would need to go to the Russian side. Here we get the release notes for every single firmware release, but it's not perfect. There are a few inconveniences. One, to download the update, we would need to type in the entire serial number of our device in the text field. 2, there's a limit to how many times we can download the latest update. And 3, I don't believe there's a way to download any of the previous firmwares. While we're still on the topic of firmware, the interesting thing is that despite the two devices having separate firmware releases, firmware updates for the regular CC3 can be installed on the 360 variant. I can confirm this because as soon as I got my device, I thought that by updating it, some of the issues I was experiencing could be resolved. The problem was that at that time, neither of the two websites mentioned anything about device-specific firmware. So I downloaded, installed, and updated my device without any issues, but I saw it removing my application for using the 360 cameras, meaning the update recognized that there was a 360 app installed on the device and it deleted it, preventing me from using the camera system. Again, TI states that there are physical differences between the devices, but looking at the device wire diagrams, I'm having a bit of trouble finding any, with the exception of the same port used to connect the 360 cameras being labeled on the standard CC3 as extended reservation or non-functioning. Now, I'm not saying that TI's is using some scummy tactics to make potential buyers spend more money if they wanted the 360 camera system by claiming that they would need to purchase the top spec variant because of hardware compatibility, while in fact the feature was only software locked. Now, even if that was true, I have no way of confirming this because I don't have a regular CC3 so I can test my suspicion. I'm sorry for being so negative up to this point. Despite all of this, I actually enjoy using my device, but would I recommend it to anybody, or would I even have purchased it for myself if I was made aware of all the things I would need to go through? Well, that is a difficult answer for me to give you. Now, last thing regarding firmware. Thankfully, there was a firmware unofficially provided by a user on the XDA Forum. Link for the thread will be in the description. I have already installed it on my device and can confirm it works. works, and I have not only seen some of my issues being resolved, some features that I really wanted to get from the regular CC3 updates. Please note, since this update is unofficial, I cannot guarantee that you will not have any issues with it. And one more thing before going into the device itself. Let's take a moment and discuss how the device is being mounted to the dash of the car. The device comes with a plastic frame or housing that is divided in two pieces. One attaches to the device via screws and the other uses the existing mounting points of the factory screen. The plastic housing is made out of durable and flexible plastic, and while the device is mounted, there is a bit of movement when pressing firmly on it. Also, since the plastic housing is a bit flexible, the Teyes unit can be easily removed from the dash without much effort. Personally, I would have liked for the mounting of the device to be a bit more secure, but I can also confirm I haven't experienced any issues of the device falling out. In addition to that, there is a glaring issue with this mounting option. As you can see, the back of the housing is quite shallow and doesn't have much space, but the provided radio connector is too big to be installed. Because of this and all other issues I experienced, I actually believe that nobody from Teyes actually tested this device on the Astra H. Since Opel and Vauxhall shared a lot of electronics between their different car models, it's my strong belief that they only tested this device on other car models and thought that since they shared so much electronics, there wouldn't be any major issues. If you go to the Teyes Australia YouTube channel, you can actually see that they have videos installing the device in an Opel Antara and Zafira, but no Astra H. Between them, they share the same factory screen, radio, steering wheel controls, and AC control panel, with a few minor differences. As I mentioned, one of the major issues I had with the device was not able to have working steering wheel buttons, and the actual way it was resolved was by using canvas settings for different cars, and one of the settings that actually works is for the Opel Antara and not the ones that Teyes recommend. Now, as you can see on screen, the setting for the Opel Antara has been labeled to be also for the Astra H, but this was not the case a while ago. Only after I and probably a lot of others complained that the recommended settings did not work, that is when Teyes probably decided to finally make an update to the recommended settings. And now, quickly to mention how I was able to mount the factory screen in place of the original car radio. I designed and 3D printed a frame and a faceplate that would use magnets to hold it in place. After a lot of prototyping, I gave the almost finished parts to a painting shop for sanding and painting, and they actually turned out better than expected. The only issue is that I made the frame and faceplate out of PLA plastic because of its low melting temperature, and I did not take into account how hot it can get in the car. So in short, I would need to reprint this frame and faceplate in more temperature resisting plastic, or alternatively cannibalizing an original radio, but I don't like destroying perfectly functional tech. Now, after all of this is mentioned, we can go through the device's interface and features. The first thing that we're gonna see once the device has booted up will be the main home screen. This screen is divided in 5 major sections. On the left, we have a vertical bar displaying our time, our SIM status, application list, settings, and other options for what applications to be displayed on the right widget, and below it there is a shortcut to our navigation app. Next to it is our music widget. It can be used by Spotify, the Bluetooth music player, or our default music player. Please note, on the official firmware, the widget doesn't support Spotify functionality, and if you're interested in getting Spotify to work with the widget, I highly recommend going to the Google Play Store and checking the app now shown on screen. This app will give you the option to display album art from Spotify and other media apps like YouTube Music. To the right of that, we have our big app widget that we can have a number of apps displayed on it so that we can have them active while remaining on the main screen. In the bottom left, we have our application drawer where we can add or remove application shortcuts. And lastly, we have our radio widget in the bottom right. It's used for a standard car radio radio in addition to online radio stations when connected to the internet. From there, I would also like to talk about phone connectivity and some of the issues you may experience with it. You can connect your phone or Bluetooth capable devices to play music via Bluetooth or make and receive calls. The first issue you may experience is specific to Android phones. There is a bug that if you log in the CC3 with the same Google account that you're using on your phone, your contacts would be deleted and you would need to recover them via Google Backup. So to prevent this from happening, as soon as you log in with your Google account on the Teyes, go into settings and disable all the account syncing options. This is a known bug by the developers, but unfortunately it only has been fixed on the standard CC3 devices. The second issue is regarding the built-in microphone on the device. The mic quality is quite poor and it's almost certain that people on the other side of your phone call will have issues with understanding you. This can be resolved by using an external microphone, as I have done also. An external microphone can be easily connected with one of the provided cable extensions. And the third possible issue you may experience is that the onboard microphone is preventing the external microphone from being used. I personally also experienced this issue. To resolve it, you would need to disconnect the device microphone in one of two ways. One is by putting something thin on the ribbon cable over the mic traces, preventing it from connecting to the device, or physically removing the microphone by desoldering it from its board. With that done, let's head into our settings screen and go over some of the settings that I feel are important. Like any Android device, we have our standard settings spread across different locations: device, user, and system screens. But we'll go over some of the Teyes specific ones. Going to the device settings screen, we can set our CAN bus settings and use the steering wheel learning functionality. Opening the car model option brings a disclaimer. On the screen, we have two options to select. From here, we can go through the Teyes app, where we can go to see the recommended settings for different vehicles and get our steering wheel buttons to work. The app also has updates for the CAN bus settings and the different provided Teyes apps, since they're not distributed via the Google Play Store. The second option brings up a screen where we can select what CAN bus settings we wish to use. First, let's check the recommended ones. As we previously mentioned, these options do not work. The second are the ones that we previously mentioned, the ones that Teyes update after receiving feedback from users. Now, unfortunately, even with these options that actually work, we have duplicated buttons. And the third option that I personally discovered that work are the ones that I prefer to use. While we're still on the topic of steering wheel controls, remember how I mentioned there was an advertisement for short and long press functionality of the Astra steering wheel buttons. You would think that with that option we could set our steering wheel buttons however we would like. Well, it turns out that either somebody making the advertisement made a big mistake, or they intentionally falsely advertised a feature that doesn't work with this car. Now let me explain. The Astra steering wheel buttons communicate via the CAN bus network. That's why when we select the correct option, we get them to work. But the short and long press functionality feature is only compatible with analog steering wheel buttons, meaning that if we wanted to use this programming feature, we would need to purchase additional buttons, which I also did. Now, I got these before I managed to get my original buttons to work. So since I managed to get the original buttons working, I added the analog buttons to the back of my steering wheel just to use as additional programmable buttons. While this feature is useful, it has a number of functions that we can set to different buttons, but would have appreciated if there were more customizations to it. Now, let's go back to our settings and finish showing some of the ones I think are important. Going to the general settings screen, at the top we can set our app that we want to use, our navigation app shortcut, and the app we would like to be set to use the home screen widget. The next option, labeled as lantern settings, is for setting our RGB capacitive buttons. We can set them to an automatic rainbow effect, or we can choose a specific color. Concluding the general settings section, the last two settings that are important are the auto run at boot and auto access after device is awakened from sleep. It's important to mention that these two options were made only available once my device was updated with the Unofficial firmware. As the setting names suggest, with them we can set what apps we want to be launched when the device does a full boot up and where we want our device to bring us after waking from sleep. Now we come to the factory settings screen. This screen is password protected since there are a bunch of settings here that can change how our device functions. The default password is 168. Here I would like to show you how you can set your boot up logo and make adjustments to the maximum and minimum brightness of the screen. Going to the boot screen logo option, we can swipe through a large amount of preloaded car brand logos that we can choose from. And at the end, we are given a hint how we can make our own logos if we wanted to use a custom image. And the last setting I want to cover is the backlight current adjustment. As you can see, the option itself is also password protected, but it uses the default password. The reason for this is that we can easily make a mistake if we're not careful. Now, if you're happy with the current max and minimum brightness of the device, you can absolutely ignore this setting. But after a few times driving at night, I quickly noticed that the minimum brightness of the device was a bit too bright for me and was making it uncomfortable for me to focus on the road ahead. So I adjusted the minimum brightness of the device via this option. But again, be careful not to set the brightness so low that the screen appears to be off. Lastly, I recommend not setting the maximum brightness to 100%. I've discovered that this may cause flickering of the screen. So that were all the settings I wanted to show. Let's go back to our home screen and check out what apps we can set in our application widget. Selecting the second to last button from the vertical panel brings up the compatible widget apps. The one labeled as Map will display our preferred navigation app on the widget. And while the app is displayed there, we can interact with it. The one labeled as Driving will display the Teyes Driving Visualizer. It's a simple app that looks sleek and has a bit of customization. The app uses GPS for determining the car speed and uses the device's gyroscope to make the car look like it's turning. In addition to that, there's some additional functionality, but that requires having the Teyes dashcam. And here's some footage of the app in action. The icon labeled as reverse is actually for our 360 cameras. Once the 360 view is displayed on the widget, we can also interact and select different angles that we want to see. We also have the ability to choose between displaying a 2D or a 3D representation of all the cameras stitched together. Now, there are way too many settings to go through in the 360 app, and to get through all of them will make this video way too long. My first recommendation would be, once you have installed the cameras, start to and complete the calibration guide. Once finished, go to the app settings and export your calibration settings to a USB drive. Now you can be sure that if you mess up something with the camera settings, you can always import them back and reset your changes. The 360 application also allows us to record the raw footage from all of the cameras while we're driving. The idea for this is to act somewhat as a replacement to a dedicated dashcam, but after testing it for a while, I would not recommend doing so because of the following. The biggest issue is that some of the files get corrupted and cannot be viewed. The files are recorded in separate 1-minute files, and after testing 57 files, I discovered that 4 of them could not be played. Because of that reason, I would recommend getting a dedicated dashcam, where in the event of an accident or a dispute, you would know your footage will be captured and stored safely. The other reason is that the footage is only timestamped and doesn't display the GPS speed and doesn't have the option of recording audio. And here's some footage of the 360 app in action. Now we're almost finished with the home screen. The bottom left contains our application drawer, where we have the option to add and remove apps that we want to have easy access to them. There's actually a second app drawer, but it's hidden. and can be accessed by swiping from the sides. But after a while I stopped using it since the side swipes were difficult to activate. The plus side of this app drawer is that it should be accessible through any screen you're currently on, not just from the home screen. And that brings us to the radio app. As mentioned, we have the option to use the normal car radio via the car's antenna, or while connected to the internet, we can connect to online radio stations. Now, as you can see on the screen, the normal radio stations have images displayed for the different radio frequencies. Unfortunately, the process of getting these stations to have images is a bit tedious. The process is done by logging a request with Teyes via a web page, where you have to provide detailed information. Now, if you're in a region where somebody has already done the work, you can download the images directly. But if you are not, you would need to go through the process and wait for the request to be approved. Now from there, we are going to check the online radio functionality. The application has a nice layout and all the radios are sorted by countries. Unfortunately, connecting to a radio station is quite slow and would be painfully slow if you frequently switch between stations. The last home screen functionality that we're gonna be covering is the ability to change our theme. We're giving a few color options in addition to a whole layout change. Now, a lot of people may prefer this layout, but personally I find it less functional than the original one. The last things we're going to check out are some of Teyes' own applications, and we'll finish off with Apple CarPlay. The first app will be Teyes' photo app or firmware over the air. This app is intended for firmware upgrades, but since Teyes has totally dropped the ball for software support for this device, it's pretty useless. Next is Teyes' OBD2 app, which I would love to show you, but unfortunately a lot of the Teyes apps are software locked to work only with their official accessories, which is fine, unless you can't even use it after you have purchased their own OBD2 adapter. The device just doesn't want to connect to the adapter, which is basically a paperweight at this point. After that, there's the tire pressure monitoring system. Again, to be able to use this app, you need to purchase the Teyes branded TPMS sensors. Next, we come back to the Teyes app that we saw a bit earlier. As mentioned, here we can check recommended settings for different vehicles, download updates for the CAN bus and their own Teyes apps. And the last and certainly the least is their own voice assistant app, Teyes Voice. Now, instead of giving us something that is actually useful like Google Assistant, we're forced to use this, and the less said about this, the better.
Would you like to sample our
Teyes Voice? It's 100% useless.
Yes, please. Another, please.
Sir, is there a problem?
I'm just making sure no one ever has to.
To use it.
I don't think I can give you any more.
I want one.
Hey,
Now, there is a partial way of getting the Google Assistant to work. The biggest issue here is that we will not be able to trigger it via voice, but we have options to trigger it via an application shortcut, or if we set the assistant as our default Navi app and set the Navi app to be triggered via a button. Now you'll be able to partially use it to open apps, play music from your preferred media service like Spotify or YouTube Music, but unfortunately things like making and accepting calls is not possible. And finally, we come to the last aspect of the device, Apple CarPlay. Now, the device supports both Apple CarPlay and Android Auto wirelessly via the latest Better CarLink app. Unfortunately, I didn't have an Android phone on hand to capture some footage. Now, initially I was thinking that Android Auto and CarPlay were nice features, but ones that I would barely use. But the more I used the device in my car, the more I gravitated to using them more than the Teyes own interface. Now, there's a small inconvenience regarding connectivity to CarPlay. Sometimes it takes a bit longer to connect, for about 30-ish seconds. And it's a bit annoying when you quickly want to hop in your car, play some music and drive off. Another inconvenience is that not all of the steering wheel buttons work with CarPlay. The media buttons for changing songs, volume up, volume down, mute work without any issues. But navigation buttons like home and going back will bring you back to the Teyes home screen. But most of the time, the connection to the CarPlay remains and you can quickly return back to it. Now, two of the biggest things I appreciate about the CarPlay interface is the Spotify app. It has a simple flat interface with big buttons that make it easy to interact with while driving, far better than the native Android app available when using the Teyes' own interface. And the second is Apple's own voice assistant. It's a million times better than Teyes' voice. And with all that said, I think I covered everything. Sorry for making such a long video. I just wanted to share everything I think was important for this device and its integration with this specific car. Now again, I apologize for any mistakes, misinformation, or if I forgot to show something you were wanting to see. All the relevant links will be posted in the description of this video. Again, please feel free to comment below and I'll do my best to answer any questions you have. Thank you for your spare time and I wish you all the very best.